So thank you for coming to this meeting of the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Committee with this extremely important topic today of what is happening inside of Russia. When we planned this meeting, I don't know, weeks ago, no one could have predicted that the explosive situation would be occurring inside of Russia today. So we're especially happy to have our speaker today, who is Ilya Budraitskis, speak on what is happening inside of Russia and related questions. He's a left oppositionist to Putin, who is currently living outside of Russia. And one of the things I hope we will spend a fair amount of time talking about, and that Ilya will be able to address, is how we as our campaign and other leftists in the West can support and connect with and help defend Russian dissidents like Ilya and the entire movement there. So with that, Ilya, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. As it was pointed out, after 21st of September, this war against Ukraine come to the new stage of the escalation, because that day President Putin declared a so-called partial mobilization, and it definitely changed the situation a lot, because if from the beginning of this war the Russian army was limited by the professional militaries and so-called volunteers of any kind. For now, it seems that it turned to the full-scale war from the Russian side as well, because in Ukraine, of course, you already had this mobilization of the military mobilization of the population happened some months ago. So when Putin declared this mobilization, it clearly came as the answer, as a reaction to the successes of Ukrainian army in the north east of the country, in the Kharkiv area, where the Ukrainian army kicked out the Russians from the huge territory, nearly 3,000 kilometers of Ukrainian territory were liberated in a few days. And it creates a very serious potential danger for the Russian troops in so-called Lugansk People's Republic. So that is the occupied territory in the east of Ukraine. When it happened, it became clear that the only way to prevent the defeat of the Russian army from the side of Kremlin, from the side of Putin, was to call for the mobilization. But in fact, it's not clear if this mobilization will be really helpful for Russia to confront the Ukrainian offensive in the south and the north of the country. According to Putin's statement, some 300,000 soldiers should be mobilized to the front. And it seems that it will take nearly 1 or 2 months to train them enough to become a really effective force in the front. However, the very term partial mobilization, which was used by Putin, is very problematic. Firstly, it means that only the people who had the previous military experience could be mobilized in the army. But if you look more clearly on this kind of legal document, which was produced by the Russian government on mobilization, you can see that there is no any certain criteria of who exactly could be mobilized to this war and who is not. Even there is some rumors about the real numbers of this possible mobilization, which could be much higher than this 300,000. When let's say this mobilization started in practice, it became clear that it could reach like anyone. So there are a lot of cases where people who were more than 50 years old were mobilized to the army. Some people who have the chronic illness were mobilized as well. Of course, a lot of people without any experience of military service were already mobilized. In some areas of the country, it looks like a total mobilization, where all the men who are able to take arms should be mobilized. And as I said already, is not clear how effective, how useful this mobilization could be. The way how it was implemented immediately provoke quite a panic reaction in the Russian society. You can't say that there was any sort of rise of some patriotic feelings about this mobilization, or that there are a lot of people who were happy to go to the army to serve on their like duty as the Russian citizens and so on. But in opposite, you just from the very beginning of this mobilization, you had a lot of people who were trying to protest publicly in different ways against this mobilization. You had a lot of people who are trying to escape from this mobilization by leaving the country or just hiding inside the country. And also you can say that this measure became really unpopular. It became unpopular, firstly, because the aims of this war is still unclear for the most of the Russians. It seems that the aims of this war from the Russian perspective is not clear for anyone. Because if you remember from the beginning of the story, that the explanation was that Russia is trying to undermine the so-called fascist regime in Ukraine. So it was a kind of regime change, war regime change, military operation. Then the explanation changed and moved to the idea that we want to just liberate some parts of Ukraine from so-called fascists and bring back the territories of so-called historical Russia, so of the Russian Empire. And now you have the third explanation, that we are fighting not just against Ukraine, but we are in military conflict with NATO. We are in military conflict with the so-called collective West, as Putin pointed. And we are fighting not just for the domination over Ukraine, but we are fighting for some kind of the new world order, where the Russian government, led by Putin, will dictate their own rules, their own will. And if you follow the recent speech of Putin 2 days ago, when this document of annexation of Ukrainian territories by Russia was signed. So in the speech, there was actually very little about these regions of Ukraine. So mostly it was the kind of global narrative about the conflict in between the Russia and the West, the clash of civilizations, a clash of values. There were much more about so-called transgender totalitarianism and its danger in this speech than any explanation of what will be the future for these Ukrainian territories who were annexed by Russia this day. So you can say that most of Russians, they're a bit of lost in this ocean of various types of propagandistic narratives, and the final goals of this war seems for them extremely unclear. The second reason, even much more important, why this mobilization is extremely unsuccessful for the moment, is that if you look back to the 22 years of Vladimir Putin's rule in Russia, you can find that during all this time, it was based on some kind of contract in between the government and the people. So the contract was very simple. The government control all the political life, all the public sphere, but the other part of the contract was that people can live their private lives. So it was like a radical implementation of very neoliberal governing of the society, where society is absolutely fragmented, absolutely depoliticized, and everyone is thinking only about his own life, because all the forms of public life are criminalized, dangerous, and suspicious, let's say. So by the start of the mobilization, Putin himself broke this unspoken contract with his own citizens, because from that moment, let's say, politics or war intervene in the sphere of the private life of nearly every Russian. And that is very potentially very dangerous step. For the moment, you can say that you have some kind of resistance against this, but this resistance still come from the minority of the Russian society. I can say that in the protests against the recent mobilization, you can define two sorts, two kinds of resistance. So the first one is the mostly student youth type of protest in the major Russian cities, where in the first day of the mobilization, some hundreds of young people they came to the center of Moscow. They came to the center of St. Petersburg, some other big Russian cities, and they were immediately arrested in a very brutal way. So these protests were suppressed nearly in the same way how it happened in the beginning of this war, when in the late February and early March we also had these protests of young people in the big cities, especially in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, and some other major Russian cities. And I can say that this type of protest for now has not so much potential, because simply because if you are just hundreds or just even several thousands, it's not possible to confront the same, let's say, thousands of armed police who can do with you whatever they want. And for you should understand that there are no rules for the police at all. They're acting even much worse as it was in Russia, like year ago or 2 years ago. So I can give you one example. In Moscow, I think it was 24th of September, there was this small protest of the young people in the very center of the city. So one of this of the activists, young guy, he after this protest, he was kidnapped from his apartment. So police intervened in his apartment, and then they took him to the police office and raped him with a stick. And then he spent some couple of days in police office and was released. So you can do nothing against this kind of cases. So you should hide, you should leave the country, and that's the only way to escape from this kind of police violence. Also, you have to know that all the Russian cities, especially Moscow, St. Petersburg, they are very much secured. So they have the cameras all around. And even if you are not arrested immediately in the street, you could be arrested next day or during the night in your own apartment, simply because they immediately can recognize everyone with this system of surveillance in the cities like Moscow. But also from the beginning of mobilization, you had some other type of protests, which were much more massive, much more, let's say, energetic, and much more spontaneous. These were the protests of the people, of the women and men who are protesting against their brothers or their husbands or their fathers will be mobilized to the war. For example, such protest happened in Dagestan. So Dagestan is Russian region. in the Northern Caucasus, and it is populated by the non-Russian Muslim minorities. So it's let's say, non-Russian region. And as it is very typical for Russia, these type of regions are the most poor regions in the country, non-Russian minorities regions. So this region of Dagestan already, just before the mobilization, was on the first place among the other regions of the country for the number of losses in the war. So the most people who were, the most soldiers who were already killed in this war, they were from Dagestan. So when the mobilization was declared and it started to be like implemented in this area, it provoked spontaneous protests, which were quite numbered. For example, people there, a big crowd, they blocked the one of the biggest highways in this region, and despite the fact that this protest was also oppressed by the police and in a very like brutal way. So, for example, the police, they even use so they how to say, they shoot into the air many times just to show the people that they can shoot at them as well. But for now, let's say the potentiality of the protest in such areas as Dagestan or some other areas of the let's say non-Russian population, not just in the Caucasus, not just in the south of Russia, but also in the east, in Siberia, is very much possible. The other side of the social reaction toward this mobilization is the huge number of young people who are trying to leave the country. So for the last week, it was reported that it seemed to be 300,000 people who already left the country during 1 week. So nearly the same number as Putin wants to mobilize to his army. Yeah. And these people, they are trying to escape in the various directions. All the flights to the European Union, they're cancelled. They were cancelled even at the very beginning of the war. So the only way that you can escape from Russia is to go to some Asian countries or some Eastern European countries like Turkey or like Serbia. And the other way, which is more, let's say, which is the more cheap and more easy to manage, is to go to one of the former Soviet republics. And the main part of these people who were trying to leave the country, they were moving to the borders of Kazakhstan. So you know that Kazakhstan is a former Soviet republic, now independent state, with the longest border with Russian Federation. So you can enter to Kazakhstan by car or by train from very different parts of Russia. And This process is still ongoing. So you still have a huge lines of people, thousands of people who are staying on the border with Kazakhstan, also with Georgia also with Finland in the north, because they're the easiest way to escape the country if you live in St. Petersburg. So that is another side of this mobilization, and it's not clear what the Russian authorities could do with it. If they will try to close the borders, or they will try to limit in different ways the number of people who are trying to leave, and so on. So next important issue is the question of the political opposition. So you have to know that all the organized political opposition in the country was destroyed. So mostly even before the start of the war, but finally after the beginning of the war, not any public activity of the opposition is allowed. Not any statements that criticize the war is possible. Probably you know that even the very term war is forbidden, because the official name of what you have now in Ukraine is a special military operation. So if you will say publicly stop the war, so that means that you are distributing the fake information about the situation in Ukraine, and you will be persecuted even for such a statement, not just in some public space, but also in the social media. And you have nearly 20,000 cases from the beginning of the war of the people who were persecuted according to this distribution of the fake information laws. So for now, you in such a situation, the opposition which is possible could exist in immigration abroad, or in some kind of underground inside the country. So, of course, most of the people who were already known as the political activists, they left the country because their life and their freedom is in danger. And of course, many of them, they try to organize abroad. They're trying to establish their own media, to develop the social media, and so on, oriented toward the more or less broad audience inside Russia. Among these people, you can find different sort of liberal opposition. So, for example, supporters of Alexei Navalny, one of the Russian, let's say, liberal populists, who is personally in jail now in Russia. But his supporters, they left the country, and they still doing very actively their propaganda, they are developing their networks and so on. Also, you have a number of the, let's say, liberal anti-Putinist opposition media who mostly exist now outside of the country. And also you have a number of the new anti-war groupings, anti-war networks, which are trying to coordinate people even inside the country as well. So, for example, you have a very interesting new group called the Feminist Anti-War Resistance, and they are trying to organize various types of non-violent anti-war protests in the country. They also are trying to help the people who are escaping the country and so on. And you have some other types of groups like this. And also you have different left-wing Marxist socialist groups who also exist inside the country and also abroad. So, for example, some socialist activists who left the country during this year, they started a project which I'm also a part of, which called После Point Media. And I think this project would be very, very much interesting for you, because we publish all the materials in Russian and in English, so you can read every publication on this website, and you can help this website, because we really need all type of donations, support, and so on. So the next question is like a big one: is the perspectives for Russia, the perspectives for peace. I don't want maybe to spend too much time now with my own explanations, and probably it will be better to open the room for your questions and comments, and I will try to develop my view on the perspectives during this. Thank you.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much, Ilya. So I think the best way to conduct the discussion is, depending on how many people raise their hands and what kind of questions that they have for Ilya, we might have you come back in before the very end of the discussion, so that you don't have so many things to answer at the very end. So we'll see how that goes. We'll play that by ear. So I have Ted, Virginia, and that's it. Ted and Virginia for now. Ted, go ahead.
Okay, Ilya, thank you. I know you don't necessarily have a lot of information that we don't have, but you have some. What you didn't talk about, and maybe you don't have information, are the tensions and conflicts within the Russian military and the Russian state, which people speculate a lot about, but about which we don't really have any information. So if you can say anything about that, I'm interested. And the other question I have is just, it's your take on Boris Kagarlitsky and where he fits into this picture. Completely different issue. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I have Virginia, John, and then Kieran.
Okay, thanks very much for your talk. I wonder if you would be able to comment at all on the left and the activities of the left, what they are, what they may be in Belarus and Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. John, go ahead.
Well, I have a whole bunch of questions. First of all, we were getting some reports here that in the beginning that there was fairly widespread support for the war. And I'm wondering if those reports are accurate. And also, how did opinions on the war vary amongst the Russian population as compared to the population you know, like in the Caucasus and in Siberia and so on. And obviously the mobilization would have changed all that. Also, and this is somewhat in line with some of the questions that Ted asked, we've been seeing reports of some very sharp criticism of Putin from the right, for instance, I think his name is Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner group, and other people like that. And is there any possibility that Putin could be ultimately deposed by any of them, and an even harsher regime take power? Also, I'm getting the impression that a lot of the oligarchs oppose the war. And what role could they play in the future in deposing Putin? Finally, I have a question as far as perspectives for a post-Putin Russia. And my impression is that Putin has really managed to squash any kind of potential alternatives to him, even from within the regime, possible military leaders, top oligarchs, and so on. So if Putin, well, do you think it's possible that Putin could be deposed either from below or from above in the fairly near future? And if he is there a possibility that Russia could tend to break up with all different centers of power all throughout the country? Would that be a possible alternative? And I would just note that I'm guessing that the nuclear weapons are located all throughout Russia, and then different centers of power and different regional rulers, could they come take control of nuclear weapons? So those are some of my questions.
Okay, so I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call on Kieran and then myself, and then have give Ilya the chance to respond, because that's a lot, and then we can go for another round after that. So Kieran, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Ilya, for the presentation. A couple quick questions. One is, we've been trying to grapple with what's sometimes called like the red-brown politics that have emerged in the last few years. Of course, it's based on older things as well. But I wondered how Russian activists deal with that, and if left-right is still a useful framework given the sort of strength of those red-brown politics. And the second question was, to what degree does Putin or the Russian state have an active political base in the occupied territories in Ukraine? And what does that base look like, and how strong is it, you know, percentage wise or influence wise or like that? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, my question has to do with Putin's upping the ante, so to speak, with threatening to use nuclear weapons, because this is the biggest chant of the Stalinist or the pro-Putin camp amongst the so-called leftists here in the West, which is, he's going to use nuclear weapons. We have to the United States has to stop supporting Ukraine. The war is to end. We have to just kowtow to the nuclear threat. So I'd be really interested to hear anything you might have to say about that and how real it is and so on and so forth. So, okay, Ilya, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for this very important questions. So probably I will start with this questions from a few of you about the possible, let's say, kind of conflict inside the Russian elite, and if it could lead to some political changes. So of course there are a lot of speculation about it from the very beginning of the war. but of course we don't know what is really going on in Kremlin, and we can't just follow all type of the rumors that very much circulated also in the Russian-speaking position media. But for sure they exist. I only can believe in what lines they could exist, but it is quite clear that you have a conflict of interests in between the military, in between the secret service, in between the big business, in between the, let's say, non-military part of the Putin's elite. So the governors, the ministers who are responsible for the economy and so on and so forth. But of course, any expression of these disagreements publicly is impossible in Russia. And you should notice also that there is no any, let's say, radicals, any kind of critics of the Putin from the right who has any type of political independence. So all these people who are doing such statements, they are very much manageable. They are very much dependent on Putin personally. So, for example, you managed Yevgeny Prigozhin, the guy who established the Wagner military group. This is a person who is totally like 100% dependent on Putin. So all his career based on the on his extreme personal loyalty to Putin and in the personal links between him and Putin. The same you can say also about Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of Chechen Republic, who is also a very kind of loud person. He's making a lot of critical comments about the exact generals of the Russian army and so on. But I don't believe that he represents any kind of real opposition to Putin. I think that it mostly expressed the progressing crisis and the loss of the perspective among the Russian elite in general. But why the figure of Putin is so important for all this parts of the Russian elite is because he created such a situation where any idea of his appearance from his position give much more fear than hopes, because he created a system where there is no any visible alternative to him, and where all the different groups of interests among the Russian ruling elite, they balanced by himself personally. So that's why his disappearance can reactivate some hidden conflicts and turn the whole Russian elite into the condition of chaos and war all against all. So that's why I think they are very careful about their attacks on Putin personally. But of course, some internal struggles of interest become much more and more much more and more intense. The other question is, yeah, and also a part of this question, the role of so-called oligarchs. So you have to know that all these big business people in Russia who got their property as a result of the redistribution of the Soviet legacy, Soviet enterprises in the 90s, they were totally politically expropriated by Putin in the early 2000s. So they sacrifice their kind of political independence to the opportunity to get much more from the ongoing privatization of the state property during the Putinist epoch. Yeah, so that's why even if they are not satisfied with the situation, of course they are not satisfied, because all their palaces and their yachts abroad, they're confiscated. They mostly cut from their villas and castles in the Western Europe or US. Of course, they are not satisfied. But they have no any political instruments to somehow develop this dissatisfaction on the political level. So, despite all of this, I can imagine that some coup d'état is possible in Russia in the moment of the extreme crisis of the position of the Russian army in Ukraine. So the next question is the massive support, the scale of the popular support of the war in different parts of the country and in the Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. So this is very complicated thing because, of course, from the very beginning of the war, you had these opinion polls that indicate support of Putin around 80%, huge support for so-called special military operation in Ukraine and so on. But you have to understand that the quality of the opinion polls in the authoritarian, nearly fascist country, where any kind of the wrong answer to the pollster could lead you to prison, it's a kind of problematic. So to believe this kind of opinion polls, and I have a lot of information from my colleagues who are working in sociology and the field work and so on, that the vast majority of people during these opinion polls, they simply refuse to answer. That's the majority of people. And even those people who are saying that, yes, we support our president and this beautiful special military operation, you never know what is it really expressing. If it's an expression of their kind of genuine support, or it's a form of just a form of conformism and their fear for the safety of their families or their workplaces and so on. Much less we can say about the support of Russian government in these occupied territories. Because even if you have such repressive politics in Russia, in the occupied territories, you have I don't know, military state of emergency kind of regime. So you can be even shooted, without any procedures, just because somebody recognize you as a Ukrainian agent. So of course, people there are very scared. They're very afraid to express any kind of their public opinion. And of course, many of the people from these territories they left. There are the most of the refugees from Ukraine that you have in different European countries, that you have in Russia as well. They are coming from these territories of so-called People's Republics and other territories annexed by Russia. So if you look at this so-called referendum that happened a few days ago, it was very kind of strange event, which could not possibly convince anybody that it is for real. So, for example, there were not even so much of the voting points where you can come and vote, but most of the people there they were voting in their workplaces or in their at home in their apartments, because they were visited by the military Russian guys with the voting box, and you mean the quality of this referendum is very questionable. The other thing is that doesn't mean that anyone in this area support, let's say, the Ukrainian government. It's another question. I think that people there they have some doubts about the Ukrainian government as well. But what is clear that unlike 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and organized this military involvement in the east of Ukraine, people in these regions they have no feeling that Russian troops and Russian power come there for long, because look what happened in this part of the Kharkiv area, which was occupied by Russians, which also experienced all this type of propaganda that now you will become a part of the Russian Federation, you are Russians, so you should get the Russian citizenship and so on. And after a couple of months, it ended, and Ukrainian troops, entered this region, and it gives a very good example of how fragile is the promise of the Russian Federation to keep these areas as a part of its state. The next two points. One is about the integrity of the Russian Federation, if it can collapse, split into various independent states or something like this. Even a year ago, I will say that it's not possible. It's like pure fantasy. For now, I see how Russian Federation under the Putin's leadership is moving in the very catastrophic direction. In the very catastrophic direction, also in a term that they kind of delegitimize the very borders of the Russian Federation. So, for example, 2 days ago, Putin signed the act of which proclaimed the four new subjects of the Russian Federation in the territories that are not fully controlled by the Russian troops. So he declared a part of Russia some even big cities which are not controlled by Russia. So you should imagine that, for example, tomorrow he can sign a statement that Florida is joining the Russian Federation, and Russia will secure its national integrity with Florida, which is historical part of Russian Federation, according to Russian history, with the use of the nuclear weapons. So this is a situation like this. And of course, it makes the condition of Russia itself very, very kind of unstable, because the current borders of Russia could be questioned because they're not constitutional, they're not legal in any normal sense of legality. Yes. So in this sense, I can believe that some kind of regionalist movements can emerge, because of course Russia is a multinational country, is a country with a very high level of inequality in terms of redistribution of sources in between such areas as Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Northern Caucasus, for example, or some other areas in the country. And also Russia is a country which call itself federation, but in fact it's not a federation. It's extreme centralized hierarchical type of state, where the parts of the Russian Federation, the subjects of the Russian Federation, they practically has no opportunity to elect their own representatives, to elect their own authorities, and so on. And this lack of real federalism is very much presented in Russia, and many people understand it and take it very seriously. So the other big question is about red-brown thing. It is very interesting question. It is very important because it touched the very foundations of the let's say Putinist ideology, of this kind of very strange mix, eclectic mix of right-wing imperial nationalism, extreme neoliberal rationality, some kind of strange nostalgia for the Soviet times, how all it was constructed. So what are the roots for this mix? And it's a very interesting question, because we can indicate how during this last, let's say, 2 or even 3 decades, this kind of ideological cocktail was establishing. Yes. And of course, Putin took some ideas from very different sources. And I think that the source of so-called red-brown opposition from the Russian 90s is very important. Because, for example, you have now such people as Alexander Dugin or Alexander Prokhanov, who played important role in that times in the red-brown opposition some 20, 30 years ago, and now their ideas became like Putin's ideas. So, for example, if you follow the recent speech of Putin, you can imagine that it was Dugin who wrote this speech, even if it was not himself, but some ideas exactly were taken from his intellectual baggage, let's say. Yes, and the last question, which is extremely important, is the question is about the danger of use of the nuclear bomb by Putin, and that this danger used as the argument to welcome some deal with Putin. Of course, the Putin's rhetoric about the use of the nuclear weapons is very shocking, and he mentioned it several times. He said that it's not a bluff, as he said just a couple of days ago. And it seems that okay, if you don't want us to use the nuclear weapons, you should help us to make some deal with Ukraine. It could be the argument, but the other question arises: and what is the conditions for this deal? What is the kind of proposition from Putin is on the table? Because just in the same time when he proposing some kind of deal, he's signing this declaration of annexation of the part of Ukrainian territory, which possibly make him far from some kind of deal. And what he really wants from Ukraine? What is his main concern? So if his concern is a neutral status of Ukraine, or he really want to annex exactly that part of Ukraine, or he want a bit more, maybe some more to areas of this country to become a part of the Russian Federation. So that is extremely unclear. So his main condition, which is very, very kind of open, is that Ukraine should surrender in the situation of Ukrainian extreme military success, which is also kind of a strange thing, but okay. But if we can imagine the deal with Putinist Russia, made under the threat of the use of the nuclear weapons, and the main kind of result of this deal will be the annexation of part of the territory of the other country, because otherwise Russia can use the nuclear bomb. I think, well, this deal looks very kind of problematic. There is no guarantee that tomorrow Putin will propose any other type of deal, with the same arguments. So why not to annex the Baltic states, because they were historically the part of the Russian Empire, or otherwise we will use the nuclear bomb. Why not Poland? Poland was also part of the Russian Empire in the 19th century. It's very justified to use the nuclear bomb if Poland will not become a part of Russia. So you in this way of thinking, you don't see any limits of this approach. And I can easily imagine that if this kind of deal with Putin under the threat of the nuclear bomb, with the price of the part of Ukrainian territory will be approved, it will be not the end of the story. It will just open the door for him to develop this approach. Maybe next year, in 2 years, because this kind of deal will definitely prolong the life of his regime and create a danger for the existence of some of the East European states. And that is a very dangerous kind of thing, because you have a nuclear bomb in the hands of the person who has no no limits. You can't make deals with the gunster, unfortunately. Yes.
Thank you, Ilya, for that very comprehensive response. Clay has had his hand raised for a while, and I see that it's Talmadge has his hand raised. So Clay, go ahead, and then Ted.
First, to follow up on the kind of nuclear threat question, I'm curious about how this is being portrayed in Russia by the media. How are they talking about the nuclear threat? And I've heard reports that sound like they are trying to prepare the Russian people for the real possibility of nuclear war. So I'm very interested in that aspect of it. Okay. My second question has to do with the awareness of the Russian people of the apparently horrific military losses in Ukraine. The Ukrainian defense minister, I think this morning or yesterday, reported that Russia lost an estimated 1,500 people, soldiers, because Putin refused to okay a withdrawal from Lehman ahead of the annexation, the whole annexation celebration. How much of this is filtering through down to the people that they've lost maybe already as many military soldiers in this 7-month war as the US in the whole Vietnam War. And I guess my third question would be just if you're familiar, I'm sure you are, with Putin's July of 21 paper on relations with Ukraine. How much of that is still operative in terms, because basically in that he seemed like he was trying to his goal is to reconstruct the whole Russian Empire. Anyway, those are my questions.
So I'm going to call on Talmadge, Linda, and then Ted and John, and then we'll go back to Ilya because, well, there's just a lot. Go ahead, Talmadge.
Yeah, thanks, Ilya, for your analysis. I really appreciate that. A couple points and then a question is, I think people forget that Richard Nixon, when he was president, threatened the Vietnamese, North Vietnam, with atomic weapons in Haiphong Harbor. It was a secret deal they worked out. He didn't go through with it, but there was a nuclear threat that was made against Vietnam, and the Vietnamese ignored it. Unlike what the Ukrainians would do probably here. The question I guess I have is, I've been trying to talk to my comrades about this and trying to explain to them that this saber rattling over nuclear weapons is a double-edged sword, not only because of the radiation fallout that would emerge from that would hit Russia as well, but also because, tactically speaking, even militarily in the Soviet military strategy, nuclear weapons, tactical weapons, are only to be used for mass tank formations and fleets, right, where you have large bodies. In the Ukrainian conflict, that war is being fought not by mass units, but by small unit warfare that's highly mobile. The only other position you would use it is to terrorize people by wiping out cities, like the United States did with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I think I really see a low level of thinking about how actual use of nuclear weapons would occur on either side. And that because we don't talk about it, therefore it looks like a scary boogeyman, way bigger than it probably actually is. And Putin knows this and is using that fear to try to get concessions from the West. So maybe you could address some of those issues wrapped up in that. Thank you.
Linda.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thank you for coming here to talk to us. I have a question that probably can't be answered, but we should maybe start thinking about it. The U.S. has not openly or publicly, but has probably I think has threatened Russia with either an attack by the in NATO or intervention in the Ukraine if Russia drops a nuclear bomb. I don't know. I see a conundrum similar to what the left faced when the U.S. finally got into the war against Nazi Germany. I mean, we're going to have a real problem with the peace groups in this country too, have taken Putin's position. I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas on what we should do if that happens? And if you don't have an answer, it's okay.
Okay, Francis has his hand raised and he hasn't spoken yet, so it'll be Francis and then Ted and then John and then Ilya. Oh, Francis, you need to unmute. Can't hear you. Oh,
Here we go. I have a couple of relatively short questions. One is the question of Putin's health. I mean, it's being incessantly bruited about the mass media in the United States that he's about to drop off his twig every time he appears in public. Some medical authority says, "Oh, look at him. He's shaking. He's going to collapse." Wondering, it doesn't look that bad to me. And so my question is, how does that look from a Russian perspective? His health, the possibility of him simply dying, and the succession. The other question that I have is the question of U.S. support for Ukraine, because we may be about to go through in the next couple of years a transition to a kind of neo-fascist government or a kind of controlled semi-anarchy run by our own oligarchs. And that would certainly in the long run, and maybe in the short run, result in either a great diminution or actual termination of our military support for Ukraine. So I'm wondering whether you have any perspective to offer on either of those two items.
Ted.
Okay. Two different questions. One is, do you have information that we don't get in the Western press about Russian desertions from the military and soldiers captured by Ukraine, and more generally Russian losses? And two, the same kind of question about the economic situation within Russia, because the New York Times and Washington Post and et cetera report on it, but do you have information that we don't see in the press? That's it. Thank you.
Hey, John.
So I've got some things I'd like to raise as much as comments as questions. And I was asking about the oligarchs. And I've been reading, I think there's about 20 of them that have recently died under very suspicious circumstances. A number of them fallen out of windows and that sort of thing. And I think it's pretty clear they were murdered. And it would seem to me that the natural suspect would be Putin and his agents. And so I'm getting the impression that there's increased opposition to Putin, especially around the war, within the Russian capitalist class, amongst the top capitalists. Now, I understand what Ilya was saying about how weak they are politically, but it does seem to me to indicate something. Then, on the other hand, I was reading that, well, I think Ilya mentioned that, or somebody had mentioned Putin prohibiting the troops retreating from Liman until after that area could be declared part of Russia. And in fact, I've read stories about Putin communicating directly with and giving orders to the frontline commanders. So if I were a Russian general, I would deeply resent that, all that sort of thing. And so I'm getting the impression that there is increased opposition to Putin from amongst the capitalists and from amongst the generals. And would that not mean that the two would tend to be linking up in some way or another? And incidentally, this is somewhat separate issue, the attempted murder of Alexander Dugin, where they got his daughter. And I've read some speculation, I forget from where, that it was Putin that carried it out. So, and then like Ilya mentioned the possibility of regionalist movements right now. And it seems to me that the situation in Dagestan would make that almost inevitable there. But there's a further question that I have, and that is, I have the impression that Putin is ruled in some ways similar, his strategy has been similar to that used by Stalin, in that any general or any member of his regime who became popular, who achieved some sort of prominence, not in opposition to him, but actually as part of the regime, then Stalin at that time and Putin now squashed them because of the potential rival. And so therefore, it's not just, the question that I have, it seems to me, would be, it's not just a matter of regional movements, but just all different centers of power, yes, maybe based on like regionalism or a form of nationalism, like Dagestan nationalism, but just this particular oligarch linked up with that particular general. If Putin were to go, well, number one, could that sort of thing lead to the overthrow of Putin? And number two, if he were to go, it may be possibly through assassination. And if he were to go, then you could you have all these different powers, not only based on regional movements, regional nationalism, but all these different powers vying for national power. So I hope I'm making myself at least partially clear. I'm kind of thinking aloud here also. My last question is on a completely different subject. If you all in your Russian group that you're talking about, if you have if you work at all with any groups inside Ukraine, especially Socialny Ruch or social movement there.
Okay, just in case people have to leave before Ilya's finished his response to all that, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to listen to it again and also share it with others, because it's clearly very, very, very important and pertinent. So Ilya, go ahead.
Okay, so I will start with the let's say public reaction in Russia about the possibility of the use of the nuclear weapons, and with a number of losses, which is very important question. So you have to understand that during all last let's say 8 years, the Russian propaganda was extremely militaristic and extremely aggressive against Ukraine in particular. So in this sense, you can say that society, the Russian society, or even some part of Russian society, was more or less, let's say, ideologically prepared for some kind of dehumanization of Ukrainians. That you have only fascists there, and we should kill them all, and things like this. These sentiments, unfortunately, still very much distributed in Russia, especially among the older generation. And the other element of the state propaganda during the recent years was that the use of the nuclear weapon is something possible and something legitimated according to the Russian national interests. And that is, by the way, very different from any kind of the Soviet propaganda, because despite the rise of the militarization in the late Soviet Union, the official propaganda line was a peaceful. It was full of the awareness of the dangers of the nuclear war. That the nuclear war is impossible. We should avoid it in any way. It will be the end of the humanity, and so on. And the Putin propaganda in this way is totally different, because they can openly play with such arguments that we will what was the phrase, that we will burn them into the nuclear ashes, for example. It was said in one of the Russian TV shows, even before the war. So in this sense, people mostly forget about the danger of any sort of even the games of with such rhetorics. And unfortunately, most of the Russian population, they simply don't understand what will be the consequences of any kind of use of the nuclear weapons. And about the number of losses is another thing, because from the very beginning of the war, Russian officials, they tried to hide the real numbers of people who were killed in Ukraine. And the last numbers, you can imagine, it was exactly in the day when Putin announced the mobilization, because just after his speech, there was a speech of the Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, who said that Russia lost less than 6,000 people from the beginning of this operation. And of course, this is not true. Of course, there are much more people who were already killed, and these losses are already bigger than Soviet Union, for example, lost during the 9 years of war in Afghanistan in the 90s, and definitely it will create some kind of very serious trauma in the Russian society. When it will happen, I don't know. I think it will happen even in some coming months, when people start to realize how many people they already lost as the society. But it definitely will have a very serious effect, because yeah, you can imagine how many people, how many Russian soldiers unprepared will be killed soon, when they will be mobilized and sent to the front line immediately. And there are already a lot of cases when people were sent to the front line without any training. So it means that these people they could die very soon. The other thing, yes, the health of Putin. Of course, there are a lot, and there were a lot of speculations about it, and there also the rumor that probably some of these speculations were organized by himself, you know, just to create some kind of atmosphere of uncertainty about his future and so on, and also in a case to test their reactions. Because as the kind of professional KGB person, he is enjoying this kind of things. So when you look at him like speaking publicly, you can see that he's 70. Yes, so this year he turned 70. He's quite okay. The only thing that probably he has some psychical deformations already, because even if you look, for example, at this famous meeting with the Council of the National Security in the February this year, and this meeting was historical because it was the moment when it became clear that he's going to invade Ukraine. His behavior was very nervous, and his reactions were very kind of strange and very aggressive. So briefly about the number of deserters and the people who are already captured by Ukraine. Probably there are a lot, and it could be more, but still the number of Ukrainians captured by Russians are still bigger than the Russians captured by Ukrainians. And it also play some role in this exchange of the people, because you remember probably then when the Russians took Mariupol, the huge number of Ukrainians were captured, several thousands, and there were nothing like this from the Russian side. Next, on the economic situation, I will say that there were a lot of kind of expectations that, well, after the start of the Western sanctions, the Russian economy will collapse, there will be a huge inflation, there will be a huge rise of prices, but nothing like this happened. Of course, there was some certain increase of the prices, but it was very far from any kind of collapse, because Russian economy is very simple. Is based on the oil and gas export. And even if you withdrew most of the transnational corporations who are working there for I don't know, car production or things like this, the Russian economy will survive. And that's the main, let's say, base of the Putin's strategy. That despite all the kind of sanctions, he will continue to make gas and oil export to Europe mostly, and that will solve all the problems with the Russian economy. So of course there will be a certain drop of the economy in the to the end of this year, but it will not be catastrophic. Next question is yes, it's about Putin and the army, Putin and his generals. I also thought a lot about about this, but you know, the main problem that in Russia, unlike Turkey, for example, the country which I experience in a bit now, unlike Turkey, in Russia or in the Soviet Union, or even in the Russian Empire, the army never played any independent political role. So in the whole the Soviet history and Russian history, it was only one case only one moment when army played a political role. It was after the death of Stalin, when Georgy Zhukov supported Khrushchev instead of Lavrentiy Beria, of the Secret Service. So that was the only one way when, only one moment when army intervened like politically. And for now, you have no any kind of tradition of the political stance of the army. But of course, there are some certain dissatisfaction in the high-ranking military. I will say just even before invasion, in the early February, one of the very kind of respectable retired generals of the Soviet army named Leonid Ivashov, who is known as a very conservative imperialist guy, he published an open letter to Putin where he tried to aware him from the invasion to Ukraine, because his analysis was that it will be disastrous for Russia, it will be a huge military and political mistake, and Russia should avoid from this kind of catastrophic decision. And that was written by the guy who had the reputation of the, you know, Russian nationalist military hawk of all of his life. So it looks like these feelings somehow distributed among the military, but still until now we had no any kind of practical examples of opposition from the to the next question. The death of Dugin's daughter was very strange, and the official version that she was killed by a single Ukrainian woman sounds not very convincing, and yes, it's possible that she was killed by some group inside the Russian secret services. That is possible, but we of course have no any certain information about this. And to the last question, to the last two questions about this comparison of Putin and Stalin in terms of repressions. I will say that during all his career, Putin never used any massive, serious repressions against anyone, and especially against his own elite. His repressions were always very selective, and he was trying all the time to keep some kind of atmosphere of security among the Russian elite. You can see that up to now, the most of the people around him are his friends from his, 20, 30, even 40 years back. So he is in this way much more conservative in his repressive politics that Stalin was. And the last moment is about Ukraine. Certainly, for a very long period of time, we had contacts with Ukrainian comrades from Социальный Рух. I know the prominent activists of this group for a very long, and we even met with them in Kiev many times. and of course, we still have this contacts up to now. I think that they are doing a really great job. Their analysis of the situation is extremely correct, and I.
Before I call on Brad, oh, got an echo. Okay, it went away. Ilya, I don't know if you wanted to address, Ted had a question in the first round about Boris Kaglaritsky, who's a Russian leftist politician. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that or not before I call on Brad, but that was one thing that I had noted. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yes, I know Boris for a long, and I had a lot of disagreements, like political disagreements with him, especially in 2014 when he basically supported the annexation of Crimea and the Russian military involvement in Donbass. I think it was his very big political mistake. But for now, he a lot, and what he's writing about the current situation, I will say I can mostly agree with this. But I have a very complicated opinion about him.
Okay, I'm going to call on Brad and then we will wrap up this discussion. So Brad, go ahead.
Hello. Thanks, Ilya, especially on the last point with Kaglaritsky. That's kind of my current take on Kaglaritsky as well. But I wanted to circle back to the question of the Russian officer corps, as well as the foot soldiers commanded by them. My speculation right now is they would be, given the current situation in Russia, would be a much more, despite the history that Ilya referred to, or right now would be a much more likely source of possible alternatives to Putin than the so-called oligarchs who are just monopoly capitalists. But I wanted to, excuse me.
I don't hear you.
You're muted, Brad.
Brad,
you're muted.
mute.
You're muted, Brad.
Okay. Well, I had to mute because of the noise in the background. I wanted to relate the question of the attitude of the officer corps and the foot soldiers in Russia to the question of possible use of nuclear weapons. Because that could be someone had mentioned that traditional Russian military doctrine deployed nuclear weapons for the purposes of breaking up large, either armored or naval formations, and be that as it may. I also read the entirety of Putin's most recent speech announcing the annexation of the territories occupied in Ukraine. And there, Putin made a very specific reference in his demagoguery about neocolonialism, and he mentioned the U.S. use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then as soon as he mentioned that, he says, and that established a precedent, he said. And I always, whenever I hear these kinds of mysterious phrases in Putin's speeches, which I read all of them and recommend that everybody else do so too, that to me, that sends off a kind of, that acts as a kind of warning that, in fact, Putin may seek to diverge from standard military doctrine. In this particular case, especially since another pattern of Putin that I would assert is true, is that he deliberately justifies all of his crimes by pointing to the crimes of the United States, aka the rules-based international order, which is just nothing but an order of criminality, of course, regardless of his making the rules. And so it's because I think the Putin regime closely patterns the behavior of the United States in the world. Putting those two together could be a breaking point with an officer corps who would have to carry out such measures, after all. With respect to the Putin regime. And so I just wanted to raise that conjuncture of the attitude of an officer corps and a foot soldier that must be very unhappy with this war with Ukraine, and unhappiness and unwillingness to fight it that is being reflected in the military results from my point of view. And the relation to that to Putin's thinly veiled threats to act like the United States when it comes to nuclear weapons. So that's kind of the question area that I'm throwing out there. And that's all I got to say about it for right now.
Okay, all right. Ilya, go ahead.
Can you remind the last point that you made? I'm sorry.
Brad, go ahead and just clarify. Brad.
Yeah, I got it.
Just
clarify my question, I guess. Well, it was sort of a statement that contains within it a question. I guess to make the questions explicit. One, we'd really have to, despite statements about the past behavior of the officer corps, we're in a new and different situation where it could act differently. And I'm just simply raising, so one, if we've read Putin's speeches, is not his comment on the precedent set by the United States with Hiroshima and Nagasaki a possible change, at least as far as the Putin regime is concerned, in nuclear military doctrine, number one. And number two, what impact would that have on the attitude of the Russian officer corps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Putin argument is very ambivalent, because on one side he's talking that Russia is ready to use the nuclear weapons only in the case of the existential danger to the integrity of Russian Federation, and at the same time he's talking about that US already created the precedents of use of the nuclear bombs, and his logic is like it is very kind of strange in the way that, okay, if US did any crimes in the some recent past, so what it means, that their crimes, they are bad because they are crimes, or they are not crimes, but just the windows of opportunity for others to make the same crimes. And this argument is always kind of strange, and it seems that Putin finally personally understands it in a second way, that the true sovereign power could be expressed in the way how the US did in the past, and Russia is planning to do in the future. So that makes that creates a very big problem with the very concept of the Russian military doctrine and Russian nuclear doctrine. But the other thing is that there is some certain procedure how to use the nuclear weapons. So even in Putin's Russia, it could not be used in a way that Putin just pushing the button and it starts. Yes, so there are some other high-ranking military officers who should confirm the, let's say, necessity of this decision, and it creates some kind of danger, some kind of risk for Putin. What happened if there will be some veto from one of these high-ranking officers. So I think that it could be one of the practical obstacles for Putin to make any decisions like this.
Okay, great. All right. So we're going to wrap this up. Ilya, thank you so much for your time and your analysis, and thank you for your courage and for the work that you do, and thank you for the courage of your comrades and the work that you're doing. We can't overemphasize that enough. And I hope that we can stay in touch with you and you can come back another time at a future public meeting. We will post the link to Posle Media that Ilya talked about earlier in the meeting. It'll be in various places on our social media. Again, the recording to this meeting will be posted on our YouTube channel. Please share it. I think it was a really important meeting. And we will keep working on getting this email list organized for future events. Until we do that, meanwhile, keep, however you found out about this meeting today, keep looking at our social media. And we don't have anything planned in this moment, but we certainly will have something planned very soon. So thank you everyone for your attendance and your participation. And Ilya, stay safe wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.